Today's video is sponsored by Ren.
Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we are talking all about how to care for your orchid pot. Yes, not only your beautiful orchid needs help and assistance, the pot it lives in needs a little bit of your attention as well. And we're gonna focus on the most popular orchid pot there is, and this is the transparent orchid pot. Now, there are many reasons why this is the most popular and the most suitable pot for orchids, but let's face it, it's not the friendliest to the environment. So now that we have them, it really is in our best interest in the long term to keep it and reuse it as long as humanly possible. So I thought I would share with you my tips and tricks of prolonging the life of your pot while keeping your orchid happy. And towards the end of the video, I also want to give you some alternatives to this pot. So I hope you'll find today's video useful and interesting. If you do enjoy it, don't forget to give it a like, and hey, why not subscribe? I post on a weekly basis, multiple times a week in fact. So let's just start with the beginning. Why is this pot considered the best orchid pot or the most suitable for beginners? Now, orchids, even though pretty easy to take care of, are really different than many other houseplants we might grow. Most of the orchids we can grow, such as Phalaenopsis, Cattleyas, Oncidiums, Dendrobiums, they're all epiphytes, meaning that naturally they don't grow like this in soils, but rather attached to a tree, and in the case of the Phalaenopsis, even tilted, like so. Their roots are always exposed to the air, growing as far as the eye can see on the trunk of a tree or a branch. For this reason, we need to pay a little bit more attention to orchid roots than any other plants, because they're just a little bit more sensitive to the potting medium we use, to how we water it, and how frequent we offer water, not to mention to old potting mixes. So transparent plastic pots not only give us a window to the roots, we can clearly see when we have to water, if the roots are growing nicely, but also when we repot orchids, we tend to not damage a whole lot of roots if we just squeeze a little bit on the pot and just pull up the orchid. A few roots can get damaged, that's okay, but generally speaking, orchids are not super great with losing their entire root system periodically. Reason why it is in our best interest to save at least half of the root system of an orchid when we repot it. With other types of pots, the degree of damage can actually be a little bit higher. So for beginners especially, but not only, this type of pot is quite friendly and offers a safe place for the orchid to live in. However, I can tell you that many people don't actually hang on to these pots. I know 10 years ago when I first had my first orchids and they outgrew the pot, I just threw away the pots. And a little bit later, when the whole orchid thing kicked in, I really regretted throwing away these pots. So rule number 1, never ever throw away your orchid pot. Most of the orchids you will purchase, particularly Phalaenopsis, will already come in a transparent pot. These pots can be used with Phalaenopsis, but also with other orchids. There is no rule saying that you need opaque pots. In fact, there are many other plants that you can actually reuse these pots with, such as aroids and even African violets. Trust me, if you will continue to care for plants generally, at some point you will wish you had a clear plastic pot. Even when it comes to mini Phalaenopsis, when you first purchase them, most probably they will come potted in this very tiny transparent pot. And soon after, they will completely outgrow it, and you will have to pot them in a more standard size pot. Well, don't throw away these tiny pots either, because you never know what orchid will come into your life, which is a tiny miniature, such as this one. This is an Aranjus, by the way, and you will wish you had a tiny little transparent pot. So just put them in a cabinet somewhere and wait it out. 99% of the times you will find good use for these tiny pots as well.
Along with taking care of our orchids, we must also take care of our home, planet Earth. Changes in our lifestyle, together with supporting sustainable projects, can make sure our home will take care of our children too. Right now, we are sadly in a climate crisis, which we need to start addressing as soon as possible. We are all impacting climate change through the carbon emissions produced by our lifestyles, and scientists are constantly encouraging us to start taking action, which is why I was super happy that Ren approached me for a collaboration. I signed up, and I am excited to see what impact my contribution will have in the future. If you don't have time or possibilities to actively involve yourself in environmental projects like planting trees or switching to carbon-neutral technologies, Ren will support projects to offset your carbon footprint for you. Ren is a public benefit company that allows you to calculate your carbon footprint by answering a few questions about your lifestyle, such as what kind of car you drive and how much you travel. You can offset your carbon emissions by making a monthly contribution targeted towards carbon reduction projects. Projects on Ren have a monitoring plan, so you can stay up to date on how your contribution is making a positive change. Ren will send you monthly updates from the projects you support, which can include photos and details about trees planted, land being reforested, and every ton of carbon offset. One of the projects that hits home with me is the Amazonian rainforest protection. I come from a country where deforestation was so excessive that not only the climate was impacted, but so many people living in the area were affected by landslides and were eventually forced to leave their homes. The Amazon Rainforest Protection Project has introduced a monitoring program that uses satellite imagery, drone footage, and video technology to detect and stop illegal deforestation. By supporting this project, I am funding rainforest monitoring tools for indigenous Amazonians, and it makes me happy to support projects that protect the only true treasure humanity has. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can start offsetting your carbon footprint today. We can all play our part in helping to stop the climate crisis, and if you wish to take a step in the right direction with me, visit Ren by clicking my link down below. The first 100 people who sign up will have 10 extra trees planted in their name. Tell me in the comments below how much your carbon footprint is.
Now, if you're a beginner or you really like these types of pots and you need to purchase yourself some pots, I would advise you to be very careful to the description, because one of the main killers of these orchid pots is the sun. Since they're plastic, they are very sensitive to sun, and in time they can become so brittle they will just crumble in your hands. And actually, it did happen to me with some of my oldest pots that are 8 years old at this point. There are pots on the market that are protected against UV, and these guys will last you a lot longer than the cheaper, lower quality plastic pots. So especially if you grow your orchids outside, which I know many of you can, if not all the time, at least in summertime. So especially for you, an orchid pot which is specifically treated against UV will be a much more long-lasting solution than a normal pot that either comes with the orchid you purchase, either you purchase it from Amazon, eBay, and so on, and does not have this specific feature mentioned. There are ways to partially protect the pots, which we will get to, but bottom line, a UV protected pot is a much long-lasting solution, which you can definitely use for many years. I have my, let's say, low quality plastic pots for about 8 years now, and one of them crumbled in my hands like a few months ago, but the others, as long as I'm careful with them, they're still kind of going strong. They just need a lot more babying than others. Here's one that I know will sound a little scary, but trust me, after so many years of orchid growing, I am totally behind this. When repotting an orchid, prioritize the pot, not the roots. The roots, if you do a good job, if you know how to repot your orchid, and if you know the growth pattern of your orchid, the roots of an orchid can grow back. The plastic pot, sadly, it doesn't, and especially if you have one of these good quality, maybe a little bit more expensive pots, it's just a shame to cut it out in order to save some roots, which, between you and me, they will die off anyway. So at the beginning of the video, I was telling you that orchids really don't like to have all of their roots cut away periodically, and they really don't. But you will see your orchid will always put out roots through the ventilation slits or through the drainage holes, it is absolutely normal for orchids to do that. And I know many people actually go ahead and cut the pot to save these 3-4 roots that might happen to go out of the pot through the drainage holes. It's not worth it. The idea is to save, let's say, at least 50% of the roots. You don't need to save all of these roots. These will grow back. If you have good roots inside the pot, there is absolutely no need to save the 3 roots that are growing outside of the drainage holes. Now, there are some instances in which orchids produce so many roots that it's just impossible to perform a proper repot without damaging quite a lot of roots. Again, in that instance, I personally would advise you to prioritize the pot. Because here's the deal, even though everybody likes to see an abundance of roots, when it comes to repotting, trust me, it's going to transform in a nightmare really fast. When an orchid is pot bound, it is full of roots, you will struggle not to damage them, at least bruise them or snap them. The more roots an orchid has, the more roots will get damaged, and the more roots will just die off in the fresh new medium, leading to that medium spoiling faster and even affecting the brand new roots that the orchid grows. I do believe I talk about this in a different video. I'll try to find it and link it down below in the description. I personally do not like orchids that are full of roots because I know the vast majority of those roots will die off anyway. So again, it is a shame to cut a perfectly good plastic pot in order to try and save this multitude of roots, which is so likely to just die off and not adapt in the new potting mix. That is just not worth it. Try to save as many as you can from the newer growth. In the case of Phalaenopsis, the roots that look the best. In the case of other sympodial orchids, the roots that are coming from the newest pseudobulb. Those are the most vigorous, the most powerful roots. There are orchids such as Cattleya, which if you just look a little bit harsher at the roots, the older roots, they will just die off. So especially in the case of Cattleya orchids, and not only, some Oncidiums as well, I would definitely not care all that much about the older roots, but prioritize the new roots. And if you repot your orchid when you see brand new roots just growing, that is the perfect moment to repot, because even if you're gonna lose the older roots, you will have a brand new root system just waiting to spread in the medium. You'll practically have no setback of the orchid. And in that instance, what's the point of destroying the pot? There's no point. It is more beneficial for everybody in the long run. Next up, as I was saying, it is a very good idea to protect your orchid pot from direct sunshine. Whether you're growing your orchid outside or even inside, but you're placing your orchid in front of an open window. Even if you have a sheer curtain, the sun will still affect the pot. Now, I have here 2 very old pots, and I know because they're not really all that transparent anymore. They're a little milky, a little translucent. I have to be very careful with these because they're already quite brittle. And I'm gonna give you a close-up. Do you see that at the top, at the surface, the plastic is even more milky than at the bottom? Well, this is because I made sure not to let sunshine reach the entire pot by using decorative pots. Keeping plastic pots inside opaque decorative pots actually prolongs their life because they obviously block sunshine from reaching the pot, and even if it does, it's only a little bit at the surface. When we repot orchids, we typically squeeze from the bottom, not from the top, so even if this section gets slightly more brittle, it's usually okay, and in this way you can prolong the life of your orchid pot a lot, like a lot. Sun can actually damage one of these pots even in a season if it's strong enough. And I did have some of my Cattleyas outside in some of these really old, lower quality plastic pots, and the damage was so extensive even after a few months. So I was saying one of these pots actually cracked in my hand, even if I was being careful with it, but it's already about 8 years old. It has lived quite a lot, but still, now that I know they can become so brittle so fast, I'm definitely keeping these pots inside the grow room, and I'm using outside the pots that are specifically designed or treated against UV. So nowadays, I use these old pots only for the orchids that I keep inside, which are the vast majority of my orchids. I'm okay with it. So definitely using decorative pots absolutely helps. And I know some of you will ask, but what about the roots? Because the roots photosynthesize. So what if they photosynthesize? Don't we have leaves to do that? for roots, it's kind of a secondary job. It's like, okay, well, since you're exposed to the air, might as well. But trust me when I tell you, they really don't produce a whole lot of food. And I do have some videos which explains a little bit more the role of the leaves and of the roots, and really, I would suggest you don't worry all that much about light not getting to the roots. The roots will be just fine, the orchid will be just fine, and really there is no difference in growth or blooming. I can tell you out of my own experience. So if you want to use decorative pots, go ahead and use them. If you can find some that are slightly taller than your plastic pot, that's even better because you're gonna protect even the rim. But definitely try to keep these pots that are not UV protected out of the sun as much as possible. Now, since I was saying that the most, let's say, brittle part will be the rim because it has the highest chances for the sun to reach it, whenever you repot an orchid and you squeeze on that pot to remove the roots from the sides of the pot, never squeeze it from here. Do so here. Most of the roots will be down here. Some of the roots at the top might start to grow along the sides as well, but the vast majority will kind of concentrate around here. So really there's no need to squeeze on the entire pot, and also don't squeeze way too much. There's really no need to do that. All you want is just to dislodge just slightly the roots from the sides, and it takes only a little bit of movement because they're already rigid, so you don't have to contort the pot. And in this way, if you're a little bit careful, even if your pot is slightly deteriorated, you can still reuse it for many years if you're just a little careful. Also, if you don't have one of those pots that already has slits on the sides and you want to punch them yourself with a soldering iron like I do with these older pots, I would suggest that you don't hurry and you don't push the soldering iron strongly, because sometimes I had the bad experience of these pots just cracking. They're not flexible at all. Again, depends on the quality. Some of these pots are really low quality. So if I took my time and put these holes gently and at a slow pace, I had more chances of not cracking the pot, which even if it's cracked, the pot is still usable. It's a little unsightly. You can scratch yourself, be careful. Even if it's cracked, it's okay. But in order to avoid that, do not hurry the holy process. And lastly, in order to properly sanitize and clean these pots, do not use alcohol or worse, acetone. Some plastics, depending again on the quality, can be very sensitive to acetone, most likely, but sometimes even alcohol can melt a little bit the plastic. What I like to use is dish soap for a quick rinse, and if I do have reasons to believe that the previous orchid maybe had some issues, some ailments, I use a bleach-based solution, a diluted bleach solution. Usually I use something designed for sanitizing the bathroom, and that works just well with a little sponge, and hey presto, the pot is good to go. Plastic pots are the easiest to properly sanitize. Much easier than terracotta or other more porous materials. Also, obviously, don't try to pour hot water on them because they will melt, and also don't put them on a high temperature in the washing machine if you are washing them in the washing machine, because they will warp, they will deform, they will melt. It's not gonna look good. Typically, if you're a beginner and you don't have a lot of orchids, dish soap will do just fine. And even if you have some staining, particularly at the bottom, don't worry, usually that stain comes from the bark. Bark contains tannin, which is brown, and it can stain, even the roots. So it is very common to have some brown staining at the bottom, maybe slightly unsightly, but don't try to remove it with acetone and alcohol and all of that. It's not gonna damage anything for the orchids, and you trying to remove it might actually damage the pot. And lastly, if you're a beginner and you didn't know, orchids can do absolutely fantastic in other types of pots, even if they're not transparent plastic ones. You can go for clay pots, whether they're glazed or unglazed. Many people do prefer the unglazed version, but you have to know that those ones transpire a lot of water. They can dry out a little bit faster, which can be a good thing. The glazed pots, and I really like this one, which is especially made for orchids. It has ventilation holes. I'll link it down below to all of these pots that I can actually link you to. Most of them are coming from Repot Me, which is my longtime collaborator, just so you know, but I really like them. You can definitely use something like this. You can also use some self-watering pots, and really the sky's the limit. I do have quite a lot of videos in which I show you how I pot orchids in all sorts of crazy pots. I will try to link you a few below. At some point I even had a cute swan planter Marvelous. It was absolutely fantastic. Yeah, the caveat is that you don't see the roots, and that can be a little confusing for beginners. But at some point, hey, if you want to try it, go for it. It absolutely works. Another caveat is that, yeah, with these guys, you're most likely to damage more roots because you cannot press on them, and also roots attach really, really strongly. There's no way to dig out the orchid really all that easy. But with something like this, it is important to wait for the right time. When you see orchid roots starting to grow, then you can repot the orchid. Even if you're gonna damage a few roots, it's okay, they're gonna grow back. And as you gather more and more experience, you will be a little bit more comfortable breaking a few roots. If you're a beginner though, I do admit that the transparent plastic pots are the easiest to work with, and if you didn't know that you can use them for years and years and years and leave them as inheritance, you can. I believe you can if you just treat them right and make sure you protect them from the elements, and also make sure you don't cut them when you don't have to cut them. Orchids are quite resilient if we know what we're doing, and definitely breaking a few roots will not harm anything 99% of the times. Alrighty then, so thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something new if you're a beginner. Thank you, Ren, for sponsoring today's video. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye!